Hi class, this is course 3, lesson 58, solving percent problems with equations. So we've talked about how to solve percent problems with proportions, but now we can write equations. And when writing equations, you need to remember that the word is means the equal sign, and the word of means to multiply. And you can convert percents to decimal or fraction. Well, you have to. You have to convert percents to decimal or fraction, but you decide which form makes the problem easiest to calculate. However, if they tell you something is 33 1/3%, you're going to write that as the fraction, because if you use the decimal, it's not going to be exact. Because you would have to round it. Okay, so you're just going to use some logic. If you can evenly divide something by whatever the denominator would be in a fraction, write it as a fraction. If you're using a calculator, use a decimal. Okay, but you'll be asked to justify why you pick the form that you use. Okay, so remember, is means equal and of means multiply. Be sure to write the equations on your paper before solving. Also, don't try to solve, just translate what's written. Here's an example. 32 ounces is 25% of a gallon. How many ounces is a gallon? Okay, so we want to know how many ounces is in a gallon, and here's what they give us. 32 ounces, 32 is equals 25%. Okay, so we can either write that as 0.25 or 1/4. Either way. So maybe we do it both ways. Of a gallon. So I'm going to let G equal gallon. Of means times, so I can just put that like that. Or 32 ounces is 1/4 of a gallon. Okay, now we have to solve. So here's our variable, and we would divide, since this is multiplying, we would have to divide both sides by that decimal. Okay, so we'd work this out, because 0.25 divided by 0.25 then ends up being just G, which is what we want. But this over here we would have to divide. Let's see, 25. See, there's 4 quarters and $1. So 1. I don't know what I was thinking. I was trying to go into 320. Make that a little easier on myself. There we go. 2, 0. Oh, yeah. Mrs. Goss cannot subtract today. There we go. So this is still 2, but that'd be 50, and then you'd subtract 200, and that would be 8. There, that makes more sense. Okay, so according to this side, there are 28 ounces in a gallon, or 128 ounces in a gallon, 128 ounces. Okay, let's see what happens when we use the fractions. Okay, right now we are multiplying by 1/4, so we can divide both sides by 1/4, or we can multiply both sides by the reciprocal. Because if you take 1/4 times 4 ones, that just ends up being 1. And that's what we want. We want this coefficient to go away so that all we have left over here is just G. 4 times 32, 8 128, so we get 128 ounces. Notice that we get the same answer, which we should. Notice Mrs. Gust had substantially less trouble with the fractions than with the decimals. Okay, so this would be a case where, in my, for me anyway, I would say, oh, I would rather use the fraction. Maybe you like using the decimal better. It's completely up to you. Okay, here's another example. If you buy a car for $8,500, how much sales tax do you pay if the sales tax rate is 7%? Okay, sales tax is just calculated. Sales tax is 7% of the price paid. So, sales tax, that's what we want to find, right? So, tax is 7%. I'm going to write that as the decimal of the price paid, which was $8,500. Okay, notice I wrote an equation. You will be expected to write the equation also, then solve. Okay, so now we need to write 8,500 times 7%, 0, 0. 7 times 5 is 35. 8 times 7 is 56. So 595 with 2 decimal points. So my tax is $595. Okay, now how do you know if your answer is reasonable? Okay, this is a very important question. You should be asking yourself this every time you do any problem. Does that make sense? So, well, 7%, okay, so here's what I would do in my head. 7% is less than 10%. And 10% of $8,500, I know I would just move the decimal place 1 over, and that would be $850. So, is 595 less than 850? Yeah. 5% would be is half of the 10%. So half of this would be 425, and 7% is greater than 5%. So is my total greater than 425? Yeah. So do I know that it's exactly right? No. But is it reasonable? Yes. And that's what you need to be explaining when questions ask you if your answer is reasonable. This is not a time to say, well, I did the math, or yeah, I multiplied it. This is, how do you know that what you end up with could possibly be the answer? How can you rationalize your answer to be correct? One last thing for you. If you correctly answered 23 of the 25 questions on the test, what percent of the questions did you answer correctly? Okay, so here's the part that we need to write the equation for. What percent? Now, when you get what percent, I'm going to tell you to use the variable P, because that stands for percent. And in what percent questions, you're not done when you get your answer, because it needs to be a percent. Okay, so what percent of the questions? Well, how many questions were there? 25. Did you answer correctly? Okay, this part right here is the same thing as equals. What percent of the questions did you get right? And that might be a little tricky for you to see, but you need to have an equal sign in there. Okay, so it's 23 is what percent of 25? That's also how you're reading that equation. So, in order to isolate the variable P, you would divide both sides by 25. Okay, so P right now equals 23/25. Now, you want a percent. And percent is always something out of 100. So, do you see how I have two options here? I can divide and get a decimal, or I can write it as a fraction over 100. Okay, well, I know that 25 times 4 is 100, so that's the route I'm going. So I'm going to multiply both of these times 4, and I'm going to get 12, carry the 1, 92 out of 100. Now, if you write your answer 92 out of 100, you will get it wrong, because you need to write your answer as a percent. So it's 92%. Does that make sense? What percent of the questions did you answer correctly? This is also going to be an area where you're going to want to read carefully, because they might say, did you get wrong? So you answered most of the questions, all but 2 you got right. So your answer should be pretty close to 100%. So that's reasonable. Hopefully this lesson won't be that tricky. I think the hardest part is right here. Don't try to solve. Just translate what's written into an equation. Then solve. Okay? Don't try to do everything in your head. Just write what they tell you. It's really simple if you can write what they tell you to get the equation. Then you can solve. Okay? With that, I will see you in class.